Well, can I thank the member for Canning for that heartfelt and powerful address, and also acknowledge my colleagues and friends on the other side of Parliament, the member for Isaacs, the member for Melbourne Ports, the member for Eden Monaro, and of course my colleagues, the member for Sturt, the member for Fadden, the member for Goldstein, who's soon to speak, and say, isn't this a wonderful thing that members from both sides of the political divide have put aside any partisan differences to salute a career and a life that has been full of achievements and goodness, not just for the people of Israel but for the Jewish community around the world. And in speaking on Shimon Peres, a man who died on the 28th of September this year in Israel, aged 93, we remember somebody who really made a difference. Shimon Peres was a remarkable office holder. He was first elected to the Knesset in 1959. During that time, he became the longest-serving member of the Knesset in Israel's political history. He held so many positions, from being the Minister for Transportation, the Minister of Finance, the Minister for Defence, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and of course he became Israel's 8th Prime Minister in 1984 and served again in that office. And he became the 9th President of the State of Israel, serving for 7 years when he reached that position in 2007. His achievements also saw him lauded across the world with many awards. The French gave him their highest honour, the Légion d'honneur as Commander. He received from the United Kingdom an honorary knighthood, the Knight of the Grand Cross, and of the Order of St Michael and St George from Queen Elizabeth II. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize alongside Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin for his role in the Oslo Accords. And President Obama gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012, the United States' highest civilian honour, for his meritorious contributions to world peace. But his story was a remarkable personal one, for he migrated to then Palestine in 1934. All of his remaining relatives in Poland were murdered during the Holocaust. And in fact, Barack Obama, in his wonderful address on Mount Herzl at the funeral of Shimon Peres, reminded us that when he was still a teenager, Peres's grandfather was burned alive by the Nazis in the town in which Shimon was born. And when he reached then Palestine, he became one of Israel's founders, and now Israel has lost the last of its founders. And at age 29, he became Director General of the Ministry of Defence, the youngest person to hold this position, and did so much to help build Israel's defence capability, particularly the relationships he developed with the French government. But it was his values and his moral clarity which stood Shimon Peres out among the rest. He once said, "The message of the Jewish people to mankind is that faith and moral vision can triumph over all adversity." And of course, he made the very powerful point, which needs to be recognised in the context of which Israel lives, often in a sea of hate and hostility. Peres said the Jewish people weren't born to rule another people. From the very first day, we are against slaves and masters. And that signalled what was his life's work, which of course was to bring security and stability to Israel, but clearly to also bring peace to his people. Mr. Speaker, not only did he have a moral compass, and not only did he have a large number of achievements to his name, but he managed to develop wonderful relationships with other world leaders to advance Israel's interest. And again, President Obama referred to the fact that he was the 10th US president to pay host to Peres over the course of Peres's life. And if you look at some of the testaments and testimonies that have been given in his death, Theresa May called him a visionary and courageous statesman who worked relentlessly for peace and never lost hope that this would one day be achievable. Tony Blair, on the other side of politics, described him as a political giant, a statesman who will rank as one of the foremost of this era or any era, and someone I loved deeply. Tony Blair, someone I loved deeply. Ban Ki-moon on Peres. Even in the most difficult hours, he remained an optimist about the prospects for reconciliation and peace. And of course, Obama. Peres was a soldier for Israel, for the Jewish people, for justice, for peace, and for the belief that we can be true to our best selves to the very end of our time on earth and in the legacy that we can leave to others. Mr. Speaker, wonderful testimonies to a wonderful man. But one of my favourite stories goes back to 1986, when then Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, paid host to Shimon Peres at 10 Downing Street. And she said, and I welcome Shimon Peres to number 10 Downing Street. And I'm not sure whether all our guests here tonight know that the last time you fell into our hands was in 1945. We caught you on a camel in a restricted military area and locked you up for 2 weeks. History doesn't relate what happened to the camel, Margaret Thatcher said. And she went on to say how Israel is small in geography but large and in history. And perhaps even more impressive than the achievements is the spirit of your people, pioneering, brave, resourceful, determined, an example of how indomitable will can overcome almost any problem. The very fact makes it all the more urgent that you have built a nation now that you should also be able to build peace. And she went on to say of Shimon Peres, your personal reputation as a man of peace, a man dedicated to seeking that peace with Israel's neighbours, is itself grounds for greater hope. So, Mr. Speaker, I never met Shimon Peres, but isn't it interesting that the people who did have such wonderful things to say about him? Now, Mr. Speaker, my friend and colleague, the member for Melbourne Ports, pointed out that in fact Peres visited Australia in March 1998, and in that time he was hosted by John Howard. And John Howard, a giant in this country, said, and I quote, "It's a special honour to be here this evening in the company of one of Israel's most highly regarded statesmen, Shimon Peres. In various capacities over 50 years of Israel's statehood, including 3 periods as Prime Minister, you have been an instrumental figure in setting Israel's course for the future. Your presence here tonight brings a special significance and lustre to these anniversary celebrations." Mr. Speaker, Peres reciprocated that affection from Howard when he described the relationship between the Jewish state and Australia as one of love. Australia is a beloved country in Israel. Mr. Speaker, those were the words of then Prime Minister Howard. Those have been the words of Tony Blair and Theresa May, President Obama and Margaret Thatcher. And we've heard from my colleagues in this place what a wonderful contribution he made to Israel's security, from his boldness and activities sending Israeli commandos into Entebbe, through the work he did rescuing Jews from Ethiopia, from the way he embraced science and technology, the way in which, as Obama says in his speech, as a young man, he fed his village by working in the fields during the day, but defended it by carrying a rifle at night. Mr. Speaker, few people on this earth have had a life as full and as important as Shimon Peres. He has helped make Israel the country it is today. We salute him for his contribution to the State of Israel. We salute him for his defence of the values and the freedoms that we hold dear. And we salute him for the relationship he built with Australia, among many others. And we in this place, despite our political differences, have an obligation to ensure that his dream of peace between Israel and its neighbours one day becomes a reality.
I thank the member for Kooyong. The question